Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful, I'd like to welcome you, dear viewers, to another in our series, In the Light of Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah's peace and blessings be on you. Dear viewers, in this segment, we'll be looking at some questions concerning Islamic law with regards to prayer and the preparations for prayer, as well as some questions concerning dreams and questions concerning the use of Arabic in the Friday sermon. Now, the first question, which is one from Basharat Ahmed Khan from Sharjah, he writes, Dr. Bilal Phillips, Assalamu alaikum. I hope that you are fine. I'm a regular viewer of your program, In the Light of Islam. Kindly answer my following questions. Number one, is it necessary to wash the private parts in wudu, that is ablution, every time, I guess for prayer, even if one has not gone to the toilet? No, this is not a requirement. The ablution, the wudu, this is washing the hands, mouth, nose, face, arms, wiping the head and washing the feet. This is necessary for prayer when one is in a state of impurity. That is, by doing this washing, the ablution or wudu, one enters into what we would consider to be a state of purity. Now, that state may be broken if one passes wind, uses the bathroom, uses the toilet. If one falls asleep, because of course when one falls asleep then it's possible to pass wind without knowing it, so that if one falls asleep it's considered that one has left that state of purity. And it may also be broken if one has sexual relations. Now, if this has not occurred, then one remains in that state of purity, and it's not necessary to make another ablution. Although, it is if one feels, a desire to do the wudu again, that feeling of refreshing oneself, and also that ablution is a kind of a preparation for prayer and a time for reflection also before going into the prayer, that this is still something encouraged, and Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has referred to it as light on light, additional light to the light which the individual already has gained for himself or herself by performing ablution. If one has not broken that state by any of the previously mentioned acts, then it's not necessary to do so. Now, the washing of the private parts, this is a part of Islamic hygiene. Whenever one uses the toilet, one uses water and tissue, for example, to wash and dry oneself. I mean, this is the best, to use both water and tissue. If there's no water available, then at least one uses tissue, or if there's no tissue available, then one uses water. The best is to use water and follow it up with tissue, or tissue first and water after and then tissue. However, one works out one's own methodology, but using both water and tissue is preferable. Using water alone is of next preference, and then least preference is using tissue alone. This is a requirement whenever one goes to the toilet. Now, making wudu is separate, different. If one didn't do so for whatever reason, some circumstances, the toilets didn't have water, didn't have tissue, whatever, you had found yourself in a situation of that, and then the time came for prayer, where you never got to an area where you could make ablution, then this would be the time when you would need to, of course, also clean yourself, clean your private parts. But this shouldn't be a norm. It has become customary in some parts of the Muslim world that people do this. They will use the bathroom and then not clean themselves. And then when the time comes for prayer, when they make wudu, this is the time that they clean themselves. But this is not correct. Now, if one has cleaned oneself, as is normally required by Islamic hygiene, then it is not necessary at the time of prayer when one is making ablution to go and clean oneself again. The second question from Basharat is it not necessary to cover the head during prayers? Well, in the case of women, of course, this is compulsory. This is part of her hijab, or covering the body, covering her head, her hair, her neck, etc. This is part of requirement outside of her home as well as at the time of prayer. In the case of men, it is not a requirement to cover the head. It was customary among Muslims from the time of the Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, to do so. However, it wasn't a requirement. That is, the Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, did not instruct the companions to do so. It was a part, the covering of the head was a part of normal dress of Arabia, and of course in countries where you have a lot of sun, sunlight, whether it's desert type countries or whatever, countries around the equator where they receive a lot of direct rays of the sun. Covering of the head is a medical necessity. If one leaves one's head exposed to the sun's rays, you find yourself with headaches, etc. It can lead to strokes, etc. So the covering of the head is very important in those types of climates. And so it was the tradition of the people. So covering of the head for males is not a requirement. We don't have what may be called a prayer cap. Like in Jewish tradition, you have the yarmulke, which they wear on their head, which is pinned on. There's a cap, which is like a prayer cap, which they have to wear. For Muslims, we don't have this. Unfortunately, again, in Muslim custom, because people have tended to look at the cap covering the head as being like this prayer cap, you may find people when they go into a mosque, for example, some mosques I've seen in India and Pakistan, they'll have a stack of little caps, plastic or straw caps at the door. As you go in, you put one on your head, you go and you pray. When you finish, you put it back outside, in the pile as you're leaving. This is not a requirement. Some people will even take out their handkerchiefs and tie it up, put it on their heads, feeling that this is something necessary for the prayer. But in fact, it is not. It's a mistaken concept which people have adopted, and it's been customary in different parts of the Muslim world for people to cover their heads at the time of prayer. However, it is not a requirement. The third question: what is masah, the cleaning of the feet with socks? Well, there is a basic principle that if a person makes wudu, this complete ablution, where they have washed the feet, after doing so, if they cover the feet up to the ankles with socks, whether it be nylon or cotton, or whether it be leather socks in some climates where it's hotter, it's colder, etc. They may wear leather type socks, or boots, whatever. If they keep these on, if a person breaks that state of wudu later on, when they have to make ablution again, instead of taking off the socks or the shoes and wiping the feet, and remember, these are socks and shoes which come up to above the ankle, which cover the ankle, then they may wipe their wet hands on the shoe as they would have wiped their head. This is part of the ablution after washing the face, and you wet the hands, and you wipe the hair and the ear. This wiping is called masah in Arabic. So one may do so also on the garment which covers the feet, whether it be a sock, leather, or shoe, as long as it covers up to the ankle. Now, there are some conditions that people have placed on the socks or leather socks or shoes. That one, there are no holes in it, but of course this is not a valid condition, because it is well known that in the time of the Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, his companions had socks which had holes in them. They had holes, pieces of their feet could be seen, etc. So a general covering is sufficient. Secondly, that these should be so